will welcome you one more time to Grant Writing for Artists Producers, an introduction and overview to what I think are some of the essentials of writing grants for individual artists and producers in arts and culture. We have another arrival. If you don't mind muting your microphone, please. Thank you. This webinar is hosted by ArtsPond, a young art services organization devoted to boosting social, spatial, and economic, as well as digital justice in the arts and culture sector, uniting principles of social innovation and artistic practices. We are celebrating our 5th year this year in kind of seeing change differently in the art services sector, taking a kind of a cross-disciplinary approach to addressing systemic issues in the industry. My name is Jessa Agilo. I'm the founder of ArtsPond. I'm also a development consultant through my own organization called Agilo Arts. The content for this presentation is supported through a generous individual grant to myself from Canada Council for the Arts. So I'd like to thank them for that support. There will be more webinars and face-to-face workshops throughout the entire next 8 to 12 months. The next 2 that are coming up in October are around Excel and bookkeeping and QuickBooks. Both as introductions for the primary target is for artists that are producing your own work. So it's very basic beginning level to hopefully increase your skills at managing your own career. Today we're going to talk about 12 considerations for grant proposal writing, and I think they work equally well for both the public and private sector. I'd like to talk about 5 items before you start actually writing anything down, 5 considerations while you're writing grants, and 2 after they have been submitted. So let's start diving in with tip number 1 in before writing. First thing, I think this is actually really essential to not just grant writing, but being a very successful artist, being a good marketer, being a good recruiter of collaborators for artistic and business collaborations, but also building up networks of audiences. And that's becoming very clear about your artistic and community vision and your story of evolution. How are you growing, evolving, learning over time? So basically, where are you coming from and where are you going to in your artistic activities, in your vision as a creator or a producer or both in the arts community in Canada? I think it's very important for you to think about not just your artistic practice, but your business practices, your community and public engagement practices. And it's rare that your story, your evolution story, and even your vision is going to be set in stone for any length of time. So it's about it's capturing and understanding how it evolves over time that I think is the most important thing to come up with to communicate through your grants. And you don't want to give the whole story because it's just not enough words. But if you are able to communicate succinctly and clearly and in a compelling way, what is the desirable pathway of evolution for your life, but what is also deliverable for you at this point in your kind of career development and in your aspirations? What is desirable and deliverable in terms of your artistic vision and your story of evolution and growth, and how is the grant going to help you deliver on that vision and that story of growth and evolution over time? How do we actually think about evolution or growth? And not everyone actually wants to grow or change or evolve. Sometimes we're just writing a grant so we can deliver on a project, but damn it, I'm clear on what I want to do now. I'm not thinking about the future. Here's a couple little tips to think about tapping and exploiting the ripple effects of your current projects for future projects down the line, or how you might be learning from projects in the past for your current project. And to cultivate this, turning from an individual artist more towards an organizational perspective, but when you have a creative impulse, think about not just that single creative impulse that you're trying to write a grant for, but what else could come from that single impulse, either as a new project or as a follow-up or as a deepening of the current kind of phase that you're in order to think about future opportunities while you're actually following through on the current impulse. And to think about that from the four streams that I mentioned, creative business, community, and public stakeholder engagement. So from a creative evolution point of view, how is this grant going to help you? And how is this project and future projects that might come out of it, how is it going to help you connect more deeply to your true creative self and to express and share that true creative self with others, so that they understand you more deeply and want to be more involved and engaged with your work in the future? Similarly, if you are successful in doing that, I think you're going to have more public involvement, more community involvement, and ideally then hopefully also more business kind of stability and evolution by strengthening your avenues of revenue, your avenues of public and community support, and also through practice, hopefully also improving your business practices so that you're more efficient in delivering one project over the timeline of the life cycle of that project, but also future projects. So when you're thinking about your grant application, how is this project that you're asking money for, how is it going to help prove not only being more deeply connected to your true creative self, but improving your business evolution, your business practices, so that you're more efficient, you can increase your revenues and increase your avenues of public engagement and support, which is going to support your business evolution. So the community evolution is about fostering a collective center of other artists, other creators and producers that are going to be core to your creative practice and the evolution of your creative practice over time. How can this project, this proposal, help invite those community members into your tent? John Saba, if you don't mind muting your mic, please. For the rest, that would be great. Thank you. Then the public stakeholder evolution is about how is this project going to help stabilize, expand, and diversify your public reach and impact. And as you want to increase your reach over time and deepen your engagement with your potential public stakeholders, I like to use the LAI principle, or linkage ability interest, to rate those potential connections and prioritize where your limited time and resources going to go in investing to try to deepen their relationship. So linkages is, do they actually have a connection to you? Do you have their email address? Have they been to a previous event? The ability is, do they have financial capacity? Do they have interest? Do they have the time? Are they in your nearby area to attend your event or activity? And the interest is, do they actually have the interest to follow through the connection and their kind of capacity to participate? If you rate each of those on a scale of 3 to 5, you'd have a maximum of 15 and a minimum of 0. A rating, if you do a scale of 15, rate your contact lists using these 3 really key simple measures, and it may help you in the future follow up and deepen your kind of prioritize your communications. I also like to think about, when you are writing a current grant for a single project, what is that single project's potential in the future for further evolution? And to consider that and talk about that a little bit in the grant application itself, so that the committee has a sense of how this specific proposal might have ripple effects down the line, and that there may be other artworks that come from it, or a deeper level of engagement and a deeper level of creativity on the current project. So I've come up with 4 basic project level streams for any single project, called initiate, incubate, activate, and iterate. And you can look at this in more detail in the video afterwards at artspond.com/AHA. There's also a download of this presentation as a PDF, so you can look at it in more detail. So I'm not going to have time to go through it right now, but the idea is that think about your specific project and how might the project itself evolve into other phases that may be more creatively involved, or maybe more business involved, bringing in more audiences, generating more revenue, all from a single artistic impulse that you're asking money for in the current grant application. Also, in your evolution story, think about the connections in how this project fits into your entire career, your life in the arts community. This is a map of my artistic career. You can look at it also in the download a little bit later, going all the way back to 1988 when I tried to be an actual artist. I'm now kind of a producer and art services person, but think about your life journey over time, and can you communicate various sources and connections to your past and where you want to go in the future, that how this project is going to help that evolution story be realized, not only desirable but deliverable. And to share that story through your grant application pitch. Tip number 2 before you start writing is to think about developing an impact practice. And this is going to go well beyond the timeline of your current grant application. How are you learning in all the streams, creative or artistic, business, community, and public, that I just talked about? How are you going to go beyond the scope of the current grant project that you're thinking about? How are you going to learn from this current project and apply those insights and learnings into the future, into future projects, and to share those thoughts in your current grant application? The purpose of developing an impact practice is to develop your case for support for your grant applications, but also for your marketing, for your business development, for your artistic development, and to share that case for support by increasing your lifelong activities devoted to capturing both your impacts and sharing your insights with your stakeholders. There's often that thorny question in a grant application, and when I was younger, I hesitated or had kind of a bit of a difficulty deciding what to say, and that is, what is the impact of this grant going to be on our community or on your career, or both? And answering that question can be difficult at times. This gets into the area of evaluation and arts evaluation. And typically arts evaluation is thought of as something that large arts organizations need to do for accountability purposes. But actually evaluation anyone can do it. It doesn't need to be difficult. It doesn't need to be costly or time consuming. If it's something you check in regularly, just like your artistic practice, if you think about how you are evolving artistically, how you're evolving from a business mind or a business point of view, to think about what your impact is on the sector and in your own life, in your own career over time. The evaluation approach is fairly simple, and it doesn't need to be complicated or expensive. So I would give you a few tips. There are lots of evaluation frameworks out there. I'm going to give you one based on the idea of theory of change, and the idea of an impact practice for an entire life cycle across a specific project, but also across your lifetime. It's basically 4 phases of planning, and planning the desired impact and how you're going to measure it. So this is the idea of coming up with a theory of change. What's going to be different at the end of this project, and so what's your desired impact, and how are you going to decide whether you achieve that impact or not, is the first phase of an impact practice life cycle. The second phase is then delivering on the work that you are going to be evaluating and collecting info on its impact, whether that's quantitative or qualitative or other kinds of evaluation approaches, to then assess and make sense and draw conclusions on your impact based on the information that you've collected thus far, and to revise your information collection approaches based on the results that you've got thus far if they are not what you were expecting, and to refine your conclusions of what's coming out of the data. Sometimes you'll find insights that weren't that you hadn't thought of that's coming out of the information that you're collecting. So to even change your theory of change based on the questions that you've been asking. Then the final stage is to review and share lessons, and improve your work as a result. And this is the kind of thing that is going to go into your grant applications. The impact theory or theory of change, or mapping of ripple effects. There's lots of ways to think about this, but basically, how will you or the world be different due to your work? And answering this question, how the world would be different for yourself as opposed to the community, is equally valid. If your focus is entirely on your own artistic evolution and growth and changing how you think and work as an artist, I think talking about that in the beginning, even at the end of your career, is perfectly valid. The art sector, the public sector funders are asking about community input also, but if you can practice on your own evolution to start, then you can start thinking about, once you have a sense of how you're evaluating your own work, you can then expand your focus and think about the broader sector as well. So what type of impact measures are you going to be including in your theory, whether it's quantitative or qualitative or both? What's the scope of measures required and realistically delivered? So how many measures are you going to be capturing? Probably 4 or 5 is more than enough to start. On what timeline? So how long is it going to take to be able to determine whether you have successfully measured that item or not? More than a year is often outside of the framework of an individual grant. So be careful about how long it will take and what kind of collection and reporting methods are going to be necessary. Are you going to need surveys? Or are you just going to talk to people one-to-one? Are going to be considerations about how much time and effort is going to be required in your evaluation practice. And then leadership, who's going to be responsible? Are you fully responsible for thinking about the questions, delivering the questions to your community and evaluating them? Or do you have other people that are going to help you, such as your artists or your business community collaborators that are helping to deliver the project? Can they all contribute to the theory of change, development, and evaluation? One last rubric for evaluation is the impact value chain. And I don't have lots of time to go into this. I just want to introduce it to you. You can go and research it. There's lots of toolkits that talk about it online. But the basic idea of it is that there's inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes that are all kind of essential to evaluating a project, and they follow one after another. So once you've identified your inputs, then you can then identify your activities, followed by your outputs and your outcomes. Inputs are things like money, time, and your expertise, your various collaborative networks, your influence, the things that you are putting in to deliver the project. So it's not just money, it can be time, for example, that's in kind, it's not cash. The activities is the actual programming that you're doing, the investment that you're making to deliver the programming, the sharing of that programming to your public, to your various publics and stakeholders. The outputs are the results that are measured, such as the number of people served, but it doesn't have to be entirely quantitative. It could be qualitative outputs. The outcomes are the collections of all the results in your activity, intended and unintended. Usually projects, there are things that we don't expect that happen, and that's considered an outcome. The impact is then your outcomes less everything that would have happened without your intervention. So the outcomes is everything that's happened that you expect, that you don't expect. Your impact is the things that only happened because of the interventions that you made, not things that would have happened anyway without it. A quick example of a theory could be to increase your profile, your public profile, by sharing marketing with, say, 3 other Toronto artists. Your inputs is how much time and money is spent by each of your artists and their team members on marketing or administration or other kinds of activities and inputs. The activities, the actual planning, networking, marketing campaigns, and delivery of the programming, and all the evaluation activities that you're going to do, such as surveys. The outputs are the events and the attendees. So we had 5 events as an example, and the total attendees by location, the demographics of those attendees, and so on, all would go under the output side. Your outcomes might be measures like the marketing cost per artist or attendee, the growth or the decline in attendance compared to previous arts events that you hosted, qualitative evaluation like satisfaction of artists involved in the collaboration or attendees, And the impact then is the expanded relationships and public profile that is entirely new beyond what you already had in the sector. There are lots of other measures that could be included in this example, and I've given you a few here. And you can look at those as recommendations if you download the PDF at a later date. I'm not going to go through those now. I'm going to skip because we need to get on to tip number 3. It's to identify the most compelling impact story for your project and for your career, featuring both a mixture of qualitative and quantitative evidence. And what a public sector versus a private sector funder is going to want in terms of that story and the evidence is going to differ a little bit, but it's essentially the same. What I have identified from my own writing for public versus private sector is the public sector is interested primarily in how your vision and evolution story helps you realize your own identified desired impacts in your chosen communities and your priority areas that you want to serve. Whereas the private sector is interested in that vision evolution story and how you realize shared community benefit, not just your own, but community-wide desired impacts in the sponsors or the private sector funders' identified target markets. Our public arts councils do identify priority communities, so that's important too. But if I had to stress one difference, that's how I would take it. That the arts councils, the public sector funders are more interested in hearing your personal take and how is it going to impact the kind of the broader sector is of interest also. But the private sector are much more interested in that broader public story and how that broader public story is going to help their brand achieve awareness in that target market that they've established in their kind of guidelines. I'm going to skip this slide as well. You can look at it in the PDF. I think they're fairly straightforward. These are kind of like 8 or 9 kind of key items that I think are important for public sector funders. Some public funders might disagree with me, but on some of them. But these are the ones that I'm looking for, that I look for when I'm trying to write a grant. Am I achieving these things? Like there's a clarity of vision that I've already talked about. There's a demonstration of need. There's a good linkage to the funder priorities. There's an impact assessment approach. You may not have all the kinds of questions that you want to answer outlined in a grant application, but you say, I'm committed to evaluating my impact in this project and my impact in the art sector long term, and I'm using this project to help kind of outline an impact evaluation approach. Realistic budget, acknowledgement of challenges. All funders, public and private, realize that they're funding the change that happens in the community as a result of your project, and we're all human, and we're going to experience challenges or unexpected outcomes. And to acknowledge that those things are going to happen, and what is your approach going to be to talk about those challenges and respond to them. You may not have all of the answers also, but what are some challenges that you've experienced in the past, and how did you address them as an example? Then flexibility and collaboration, exit and contingency, and other ones there that I've mentioned. And if you've got questions about any of these items specifically, email me at hello@artspond.com, and I'm happy to answer them. I'm a little bit behind schedule, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit here. Tip number 4 before writing is express your case verbally first. Before you start writing, talk it out loud. I'm shy. I don't like talking my ideas out loud. This one's uncomfortable for me, but I find it works so much better when I talk it out loud, whether it's in the middle of the night, no one's around, I've got a nice quiet room, or I'm out in the park somewhere where no one's listening to me closely. Talk out loud what you want to say in your grant application. And I find I express it so much more smoothly using simple human language and in a much more compelling story when I first try to express it verbally than when I try to write it down. So here's an example of what I try to do when I talk it out. And it's kind of, I give an example here for 3 minutes, but you could give yourself 1 minute, you could give yourself 10 minutes. I would split it as 1/3 on the fundamentals and 2/3 on the stories. The fundamentals are the who, what, where, when, why, and how, the basics of what you're going to do. That's the logistics information, and we want to get that information out as quickly as possible with as few words as possible, because your support material is going to give support for the actual project itself, that it would be successful. Just the basics of what you want to do is going to be necessary. The priority of your grant application text should be, I think, about how and why are you doing this project? How will things be different as a result of the project? And how are you going to grow and evolve and change? Everything that I've been talking about up until now. And we are not practiced about talking about this a lot in our grant applications. So I am recommending you spend 2/3 of your time talking this out, because you need more practice talking about that. The who, what, where, when, and why is, we kind of know that. We think about that a long time before we actually write a grant application. But the why and how things will be different is something that we don't talk about as much. So I'm recommending you spend more time on that. And repeat it as many times as necessary until you get something that's really compelling. So repeat it 3 times, one after another in quick succession. Take a break, come back in the afternoon and try it again 3 more times until you get something that you like and feels right to you. Then you can move to your grant, actual sitting down and writing it down. I find using speech-to-text dictation either in Google or in Microsoft Word, and there's many free tools online that do speech-to-text really, really well these days. Using speech-to-text means you actually don't need to write anything, type anything down from your voice storytelling, because the ideas that you are talking about verbally will have been captured by the computer. If you need help on voice to text dictation, if that's not something in your rubric, email me at hello@artspond.com and I'll send you a few really easy tips and tools to get that going. I carry a microphone around. Everyone who has a phone, there's speech to text on your phone. This should be something that's relatively quick and easy to do. The last tip before writing, it's still about storytelling, is capture those, I call them smiling eyes moments. And those are smiling eyes for yourself, but also in your community. Where is their delight, surprise, feelings of anticipation, where their eyes are open and engaged, or your eyes are open and engaged, whether you are at a show or you are looking at the artwork that you've created and you go, wow, where did this come from? When there is delight, surprise, anticipation, you want to try to capture what caused that. What's the source of that? What's the story that happened? Why are you feeling delighted? And to share those kind of delightful moments, those change moments, those impact experiences in your grant applications. A couple quick tips for capturing some of those testimonials from others. I'm going to leave this as a rubric for you to download in the PDF. Don't have lots of time to go through them, but I've given you some examples for capturing 3 words, capturing memories, capturing some stories, lessons learned, or change, what could have been done differently in the project and the experience that you delivered to hopefully impact your next project in the future. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Sorry we had to skip, but take a look at the PDF. I think these are fairly clear. So now we're on to while writing. Guide the reader with compelling simplicity. And sometimes this is harder to do than you realize. That's what good editors are for sometimes. But I've given you a couple examples there in green. The goal here is to help readers discover and comprehend your case for support as quickly as possible. When the peer assessment committee reads, they often go back a second, a third, or fourth time, sometimes at the table at the assessment committee, trying to get a sense of how they actually feel about your grant application. So if you've got lots of white space with headers, so it's not just clear text everywhere or just paragraphs everywhere, you actually have headings for various segments, such as impact or evaluation or objective or vision, then it makes it so much easier for the assessment committee to come back to your grant application and find what they're looking for, your core case or support material. Sure, you're losing 5, 10, 20 words, but I find it's a big, useful investment of word space. Bullets are useful also, and I've got a tip in a moment about how to include those in grant application forms, which often don't allow bullets. Including images where possible. That's hard to do now in the actual grant text with all the online forms that are popular for the public sector grants. But if you can include images in your grant support material, not just videos, but images that relate to a specific image or story that you're trying to tell in the grant application, refer to it as figure 1 or figure 2 in the text. So you have those images to go with your compelling case for support story. I have found when you use lots of adjectives, sometimes when you're trying to figure out what your story is, we use lots of adjectives to describe an essential idea because we don't necessarily know how to go any deeper. But if you have, limit the number of adjectives that you're using, the number of descriptive words to 2 or 3. So this project is delightful and surprising. I wouldn't limit it to I wouldn't basically add more than that. But if you do have long lists of words that are in kind of a comma separated list, I found Z to A as opposed to A to Z or some random order of words actually is much easier to read. I have no idea why. Maybe it's my OCD brain, but I've asked quite a few people and they've all agreed that Z to A lists are easier to read. So try that out and see if you agree with me. Everyone talks about no abbreviations, and I'm trying to adhere to that in my own writing. It's hard when you have long project names that are 4 or 5 words long and you don't want to use up the word space. But when I've been on a peer assessment committee, trying to remember all those abbreviations for project names and so on, even when I've just read it, the paragraph before, it disappears really quickly. So I'm trying to adhere in my own writing to no abbreviations ever, even if I'm really stuck against the word limits, as well as jargon, buzzwords, hyperbole, and so on. And I'm going to talk about those in the next here, some examples. So vague and empty rhetoric is like, okay, example, many people will benefit. That's really vague and empty, doesn't do a lot. So we do want to, instead of writing that, we want to write 50 youth artists 18 to 25 years of age will receive 20 hours of instruction over 2 months. Undefined or assumed language, for example, might be like collaborative partnerships. That's a very popular phraseology in the world these days, but what does that actually mean to you and your context? I think is really important. So you don't want to use phraseology like that without further definition. So I would use something like, okay, collaboration is in our blood. Okay, we know collaboration is important to you. And then in the next sentence, say, okay, what is your values around collaboration? What is your approach around collaboration? To help define that in more detail. And throughout the grant application, keep going back to collaboration and defining it much more specifically what you mean by those words. A quick tip on including bullets in grant application forms that don't allow formatting. All the public sector grant online forms now don't allow formatting of text. They don't allow italics, they don't allow bolds and different heading formats, but we can fake bullets by just using the plus sign, or you can actually type in a character bullet. In Mac, you can use Option Shift 8, or in Windows, you can type Alt 0149 on the numeric keyboard, and it will copy out a bullet. So I use that to mimic a bulleted list in my grant applications. You can also just copy and paste a bullet as a character symbol from Microsoft Word if you can't remember those keyboard shortcuts. While writing, tip number 7 is to mirror creative and practical stories together. So your business details are core characters in your story. Artists, we want to talk about the artistic side so much, and there's so much depth and meaning to us in the artistic vision and the artistic experience that we're sharing, but the business side is just as important, and they treat the numbers and the venues and so on as characters in your story, just like you're a protagonist or antagonist is in a theater production. Your venue is a character in your production. Your budget is a character in your theatrical production. How do those characters support your artistic vision? And map out your detailed schedules and budgets at the same time. So develop your venue ideas as a character, your budgets at the same time as your creative vision, and have no stories without numbers and no numbers without stories. An example of this on the budget side, I see it too often. We summarize, we just have $2,500 for performers and nothing else. So in a more detailed budget, you would have an artist breakdown. So there's 2 artists. They're involved over 5 days, and they're getting a very bad daily rate of $250, in this case for $2,500. Tip 8, while writing, be a review fiend and remain open at all times to new ideas, new opportunities, even pulling grant applications if you feel that it's not ready. If you haven't expressed your compelling case for support yet, I have pulled grant applications myself that I was expecting to submit and waiting for the next deadline until I feel it's ready. So that success rate potential is that much higher. And review and edit again and again throughout your process. I never write draft text in grant forms themselves to help me with the review application. Too many times in my young career, I lost actual grant text because I put it in the online form. I didn't save it offline. And I lost all my work. So I refuse to write grant applications in forms now. I only do them in Microsoft Word or in Google Documents. I copy out all the grant questions. So I have them and I can review them and track changes and so on in Word or on Google Docs or whichever platform you're using for word processing. Also, it's really hard. It's not conducive to positive, healthy business life practices. But when I'm in grant deadline mode, I almost never stop thinking about grants. I try to turn my brain off so I can have some rest and have a good balance between life and work. But it's hard when those grant applications are due. I think be open throughout the whole period, basically, is the idea, that you don't really have an off hour. If you have some inspiration in off hours, be open to that and pursue the opportunity when you have the time. Being open and honest. I've worked with organizations who didn't want to talk about their challenges or the difficulties of their work. They wanted to be 100% positive all of the time. That is an approach. It's not one I subscribe to. When I've been on peer assessment committees, I really like to hear the human stories, the human touch, the challenges and the successes in a balance. But if it's helpful because I then want to support you in addressing those challenges. But you can express those challenges with a positive slant. So, okay, I've experienced this challenge in the past. This is what I'm doing about it. This is what I've learned. It's not just all about failures. It can be actually about learning from the challenges. I find we actually learn more from our failures and challenges and our roadblocks than when things are a success. 2 or 3 more to go here. The last one on while writing is to budget enough time. There's never enough time. I never have enough time to finish grant applications, and I feel like I'm in grant season in the fall. That's all I'm doing is writing grants. But when you're hiring other people or working with other people or even hiring yourself to write your own grants, I try to not allocate more than 10% of the amount that I'm asking for if I was to pay myself from that grant for writing the grant itself. So if I'm asking for $10,000 for the grant, I would pretend I'm going to pay myself $1,000 to write the grant, which is 10% or 1.5 to 8%, and figure out, and then basically try to write the grant for that amount. It can't be included in the grant application. The Association of Fundraising and Professional Ethics means you can't accept compensation for writing a grant or doing fundraising as a percentage of grants received or donations received. That's not considered ethical. But just as an, okay, how much time should I be spending on a grant application? I recommend somewhere between 1.5 to 10% of the amount of money that you're asking for, if you were to be paid at an hourly rate. That's how much time you should be spending. So I've given you, based on a $30 an hour rate, what a $10,000, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, or $200,000 grant application might look like in terms of low number of hours and high number of hours. You can look at this in more detail in the PDF download. Basically, the principle here is set a time limit. I recommend it. Aspire to that time limit over time. Improve your grant writing activities so that you're reducing the amount of time that you're spending on grants. We all spend way too much time on grants. I spend personally way too much time on grants. So I'm trying to estimate the number of hours I spend on a grant. I keep track of the number of hours, and I'm trying to adhere to these kinds of estimates. No more than 200 hours for a big ass application, and for a really small one, between 20 and 30 hours. If you already have material from previous projects about your vision and your artistic activity, then a small grant application is pulling together a budget and pulling together the project outline, and the rest of the material should come from your previous activities. The previous grants you've submitted. If you're a brand new grant writer, this is maybe not going to be deliverable in the early days, but this is something that I recommend you aspire to, or if you're hiring someone else out to support your grant writing, this is kind of an allocation that you might want to consider. After writing, 2 really quick ones. Be resilient. No is rarely forever, only no for now. I can't stress that one enough. If you get a no for a grant application, apply again. And get feedback from the grant officer on, okay, what did the peer assessment committee say about your grant application? How can you improve? And try again. Keep trying until you get a yes. I once submitted the same project application 5 times over 5 years, and it finally got funded after 5 years. I almost wanted to abandon it at that time, but I kept going, I kept learning, and eventually it got funded. At the same time, don't put all your eggs in one basket. This is really hard if you are struggling with time and resources to devote to your artistic practice, but always have a backup plan in the works. So if you can submit 2 grant applications in the same kind of production season, if one doesn't work out, then you have a second one to rely on. You also need what I call a bounty plan. That, okay, what if you get both grant applications? Do you have the capacity to fulfill both if they're both accepted? You need to be ready for that. And that's one that I'm kind of experiencing right now. I have a bounty because all the grants I put in, including my backup ones, came in the last 1.5 years, and I'm struggling a little bit, but I have a bounty plan in place in terms of helping me deliver, so it's okay. The last one after writing is to put your hand up and ask for what you need, and ask to become the leader of your vision in your community and your stakeholder areas that you're wanting to engage with. This is something that someone recommended to me. You don't need to be an expert. You just have to be willing to put in the energy, the time, and the effort to become the leader or the visionary or the change maker or the person, the creative soul, the spirit that you want to be. by putting your hand up, putting yourself out there, and asking for the financial resources, the human resources, the support, whether it's volunteer or paid, to help you deliver on your project. We don't ask enough. We ask for donations, we ask for people to come to our shows, but I don't think we ask for enough advice from our community leaders about how to write our grants. Can you please read this one paragraph and give me some feedback? Is it compelling? Is it clear? Is it concise? And so on. Ask for help in whatever way you need to grow and evolve and kind of communicate that case for support that's necessary for your grant to be successful in a very compelling way. And that is it. I went about 10 minutes longer than I planned, so I don't have as much, maybe 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes for questions, but I hope that was fun and informative for you. I'm open to taking questions either through the chat window, or if you want to unmute yourself and speak your words instead of writing, because I said speaking verbally is easier than writing down in one of my tips in the beginning. Feel free to turn on your microphone and ask away, either about anything that I've shared here in this presentation, or just something that's specific to your own practices. And if we don't have any questions, then Jessa, we can end up. But yes, go ahead.
Question. You included in the previous slide applying for, if I understood you correctly, applying to more than one funder for the project, like having a backup. Do you include both of the asks in your revenue?
So what I was thinking about is a backup plan for another project or another idea.
Another project. All
but
right.
Yes, I assume I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but it's a good question generally. I assume every project that you're applying to more than one funder for that project. And what I always do when they ask for a detailed budget as an attachment, I give them a minimal and a desired project and an anticipated project. Grant budget. You can also just ask for, in the current grant application, your budget is only for what you would spend for OAC money or TAC money, and only include the specific amount for what you're asking for. Then as an attachment, you include your full budget with all of your desired funders and all your desired activities with the detail there. So in more complex projects where you have lots of funders, so if you're asking for, say, $100,000 or $75,000 each from multiple funders, then I would just include a $75,000 budget to the Canada Council, for example, and include the $250 or whatever that is, $225,000 budget as an attachment with the other funders. So it's very clear how, if I only get the Canada Council grant, how I'm going to spend that money.
Okay, thank you.
On smaller projects of only, under $50,000, I would not do that. I would include the full budget with all funders in the grant in the budget form, basically, and make it clear in the revenue stream about which revenue stream is projected. And include in your budget attachment, if they don't ask for it, include it in your budget attachment a contingency statement about if you don't get all the other funding requested, although normally a contingency statement is requested in grant forms, but if it's not included in your appendix support material, a contingency statement about what is going to change if you don't get all of the requested funds. Thanks for attending. I hope to see you at the Excel and QuickBooks bookkeeping sessions in October. Otherwise, happy grant writing, happy storytelling, and I hope this was a helpful session for you today.